Well, I grew up in Northeast Portland. My dad was a plaster, so we had a middle class income life. I had two siblings, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And my earliest memories really are of just playing a lot with my mom and my sister growing up. My brother's a lot younger, so I didn't really hang with him until much later. But um, my mom was a very creative person. She was sort of an artist that never quite found her medium, but she played a little piano. She did some drawing. She was very interested in film and always tried to take us kids to cultural events when we were little. So my mom was my big influence in my life. I was very close to her. She grew up on the Flathead Indian Reservation in Montana, so she had an interesting background. And I became very interested in Native American culture when I was a little kid, and my mom encouraged that. And probably my very first memory is that I had a little plastic set of cowboys and Indians, and I really liked the Indians more than the cowboys in that set. But there was a horse that I was really like, and this is like, I don't know how old I am, 4 maybe. And I remember asking my mom, how do you draw a horse? And I have this memory sitting at the kitchen table with her, and she looked at this little model horse thing, and she drew a horse for me on a piece of paper and said, "Now let you try it." And I tried it. So that's one of my first memories of sort of like an artistic joy that I found pretty early on. And my horse wasn't nearly as good as her horse, obviously, but it was sort of like a beginning. And she was very encouraging. And shortly after that, she even bought me, there was a drawing by all people. Norman Rockwell was a drawing, I think it was on the Saturday Evening Post, of John Kennedy. And he had done it as sort of a sketch. It wasn't his usual painting style. It was like in charcoal. And I asked my mom, how do you get that look? And she said, "Oh, that's charcoal." And so the next day she bought me a set of charcoals and a sketch pad. So I started drawing with charcoal, which is extremely messy as a little kid. But that was one of those things. And I remember trying to copy Rockwell's sketch of Kennedy, and Mom put it on the fridge. So, and a little bit later after that, I liked portraits, I liked drawing faces. And so she ended up getting me a set of oil paints when I was quite young. And I started painting with oils. And she was also very interested in movies and soundtracks from movies, and I grew up with those records as well as the typical, Kiss and Radio in Portland played the pop music, and so I heard that a lot. My sister was older, so she started buying records before me, and my sister was really into Motown and a lot of R&B stuff and some blues, and so I was lucky to be sort of have this nice sort of background thanks to my sister's record collection. And but my mom, I remember when she got West Side Story and Music Man, those two musicals came out the same year, and we played those records all the time. And I memorized the Trouble in River City monologue off of Music Man, and I loved the music in West Side Story. It was just something that I just couldn't get enough of, and the lyrics were very clever. I was really drawn to lyrics and writing too, and songs like Officer Krupke and tunes like that. I just fell in love with that, and I loved patter songs. And I loved novelty patter songs, silly ones like Big John. I remember that song. I had bought that for one of the first 45s I bought. And songs like My Boomerang Won't Come Back. They were kind of silly Alan Sherman tunes and Smothers Brothers songs. They were humorous and very clever. The wordplay was really important to me. And rhyming, I loved to rhyme things very early on. And my mom kept everything. And after she passed, I found this box in the attic of all these things that I had done as a little kid, and I just, at the course as you're growing up, you're not really that aware or that grateful of a particular parent's influence on you. But my mom kept everything, and she encouraged me to write, and I made my own comic books and did the covers to them. And I thought maybe I was either going to be, my mom said, well, you should be a writer, maybe go into journalism. So I got in grade school, like in fourth grade, there was my little grade school down on Columbia Boulevard, which burned down, was called Whitaker Grade School. And they had a school newspaper that was run by the eighth graders. And my mom said, well, just go in there and see if they'll take one of your stories. So I went in with a story, and they said, oh yeah, we'll put it in the school newspaper, the Whitakerette. And to my mom, that was like a huge thing. And then of course that makes it huge to you as a kid. And so writing very early on, and when I got into high school, I was managing editor of the school paper, and I wrote editorials and won a couple writing contests. And so I was always writing. And I thought I was headed towards a degree possibly in language arts. And in fact, that's what I did do. I ended up eventually in college getting my teaching degree in English, and I taught English for 3 years. But really, it was when I was in, seventh grade, like millions of other young kids at that time. So very strange. My memory of that time is real strong, and that's something about my childhood is that I had these sort of, the way James Joyce described them as epiphanies. I had these moments in time where things seemed to mean a tremendous amount to me, and they had an effect on me, and they affected my brain in a particular way. One of my strongest childhood memories is when Kennedy died, and the sort of a profound effect it had on me because of the way my family reacted. They were very strong in the supporters of the Democratic Party, and my mom was involved with that. And so the household kind of took on this. I knew something was, even though I was young, I knew it was, obviously we all knew it was a heavy duty thing, but I think for me it was even more heavy duty. And then, so that was November of '62, and just 3 months later, I think it was, the Beatles made their first appearance on Ed Sullivan. And I think a lot of times people don't realize how close those two incidents were and what the impact it had on my generation, because the Kennedy assassination was a powerful thing that we all went through that were that age. And then it was almost like, it seemed like the world was a very dark place, and it was sort of like a coming of age of an awareness of our mortality, I guess. And then all of a sudden you have this group that's very optimistic and exciting, and everybody's talking about them, and the music was phenomenal. And so it was the impact of the Beatles. I think people don't always associate that with how close, only 3 months apart from Kennedy being killed. But I think that the part of the reason that the Beatles were such a phenomena in the U.S., even more than in Europe, was because of those two things so close together. And I was one of those kids that I went immediately from being involved in drawing and painting and those things to wanting a guitar. And I think a lot of kids in my generation who were artistic at all in any way, that the Beatles and the whole British invasion that followed drew everybody to that. And it's like the best and brightest artists of my generation, whether you're talking Joni Mitchell or Bob Dylan or whoever, those people were drawn to music. It became the medium that we all said, this is what we want to do. And I was one of those kids. And so my life just switched completely at that point, where all of a sudden, all I wanted to do was play guitar and try to be in a band, which was ridiculous at that stage. But that's what happened to me. So that was like a major turning point, as it was for millions of kids. The difference between me and all of my friends had guitars. We all got guitars, but I was the only one who kept playing guitar, except for this young woman I met in high school when I was 16, Rindy Carter was her name, but at Madison High School. And she was playing music, and she had a guitar, and she was already performing because she could sing. I couldn't sing or shit. But when I was started hanging out with her, she's 16 years old, juniors in high school. She was already playing like church coffee houses and places like that. And she played in front of our class. I was in a class, that's how I met her. I was in an English class with her. And I fell immediately in love with her, and she just sort of not bowled me over, and so we started out dating, and then we started playing music together, and we played our first gig together. We did like Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Judy Collins. We did that kind of music, folk music, and on two guitars, and Rindy sang, and I just sort of backed her up. And we did our first gig when we were seniors in high school at downtown at the American Museum, which was a sort of a beatnik club at the time, hippie beatnik club, right? A lot of Portland State students hang out there. And we were surprised because we felt very insecure. We didn't know what we were doing. But the reaction to Rindy was immediate. I could see in the audience, I could feel it. They were like really riveted to what she was doing. And then in a way, I felt kind of, when I was playing with her, I felt sort of insecure because I didn't sing, and she was playing guitar and I was playing guitar. And so I thought, I should start writing. I should start writing songs. And so I wrote like my first song that year, the year I graduated from high school. And then from there on in, it was sort of like I went, oh my God, this is what I was meant to do, was write songs. So I became obsessed with writing songs, and I wrote hundreds of them through college, and just kept writing. And we stayed together, went to college together, and played in bands together. And the year I entered college, the Vietnam War was still going on, and I had a very low draft number, which meant I was, if I didn't get into college and get a 2S, I would definitely be drafted. My mom and dad really, really wanted me to go to college anyway. So, but we had no money for it. So I had to get a scholarship, and luckily I got a scholarship to go to college. But I had to get a 2S and remain there. And I decided that at that point, my music abilities and my performing with Rindy was what I would call, it was more than a hobby. Well, I mean, I took it really seriously. From the very beginning, because I thought that the potential was there. But I knew, being not a stupid person, that we weren't good enough to make a living at it. And so I decided to go ahead and get a degree and be a teacher, which was sort of like a second option for me, an English teacher. So that's what I did in college, is I went and got my degree in secondary education, and I could teach either history or English or reading, which my first teaching job actually I was a remedial reading teacher. But and then I switched to English later on. But while we were young adults in our early 20s, we were both teaching. Rindy got a teaching job too, and I was teaching in Bend. She was in Redmond, so we were in Central Oregon. And but we were playing all the time, and I was writing all the time, even though teaching was our main way of making a living. We both had this sort of dream, like eventually we're going to get good enough at this that we'll feel confident to quit our teaching jobs and take a shot. So that's what we did. We taught 3 years, and then we were playing in a band in Bend, Oregon, and we were doing really well. And we started seeing all these bands come through town. Every time a band came to Bend, we would go see them. And the best of Portland's bands at the time, Sand, Notary Sojak, Wheatfield, there were all these bands that were coming through. And so we got to see them, and it was a great education. And we'd meet them, I'd go and talk to them, I'd ask them questions about, how do you guys pull this off? How do you make a living? How do you work this out? And the thing I noticed, there were a few bands that were doing original music, but a lot of bands were not. They were doing covers of country rock and doing really well with that kind of style. But that wasn't my interest. I didn't want to do a band where I was doing covers. Although we did, just in Bend, we did do covers just to make a living, because there weren't many places to play in Bend. It was very country in those days. So we actually learned a whole country set of night of music. And Rindy played bass, and I'd play fiddle, and we had a steel pedal player, and we did like, all the Hank songs. We could do that stuff, and it was a good education as a songwriter to play the Hank Williams book and the other great country writers of the time, Patsy Cline and stuff like that. Good education for me as a songwriter to learn other people's songs. But anyway, we decided to quit our teaching jobs, which is our parents thought we were insane, and it was a big risk, but we did. We quit our teaching jobs and moved back to Portland, where we grew up. And Portland had completely changed in those we were gone all the way through college and in teaching. So we hadn't been in Portland for 7 years as far as knowing what the hell was going on. And so we had to start from the bottom. We were just playing the really, any kind of gig we could get it all for the first year. Barely kept afloat financially, but then in 77, we started Seafood Mama. We found a fiddler, Bruce Sweetman, who was wonderful, and had Blaine Moody from Portland, Maury Woodruff from Bend, and formed this band. And we started playing a really interesting combination. My original material was very sort of Americana with a little bit of swing and a little bit of rock. And then for covers, we would do just the most fun music we could find of covers bands. So we would do a little bit of bluegrass because our fiddler could handle that. We do a little bit of swing, and we do some funny songs that I wrote. And Seafood Mama caught on. It was people loved it. It was a fun dance band, and that was that era where the boomers packed all these great clubs in Portland. And it's hard to imagine now, but in just 2 years, we had gone from nothing really to being one of the most 2 or 3 top bands in the town. And a lot of it was, of course, Rindy. She switched from guitar to playing her dad's saxophone. She picked that up real fast. She's got an amazing ear. And so Rindy out front with the saxophone and the band backing her up. All of a sudden, I saw the writing on the wall. Well, this is where this is going to go. And I started writing really for her, from her point of view. And then all of a sudden, my writing changed. I got away from the country thing completely. That was so popular. I started moving. I kept folk in my writing because it was what Rindy related to. So the chords, if you listen to like "Harden My Heart," those are very folky chords. And I started playing in tunings on my guitar, started experimenting, and I never left that. I still play in tunings now. I rarely play in standard tuning. But Seafood Mama was a great, I guess you'd call it a lab. It was an experimental lab for me. I could write a song, we'd go and play in front of a packed house, and I could see what was working and what was not working in my material. And I would drop tunes and add tunes, and we were honing and honing and honing. And it eventually honed to the point where Harden My Heart got written, where I wrote this tune, and it defined so much what Rindy could relate to, and the sax was used instead of a solo. She was playing a lot of solos, learning blues licks and playing solos. And then we changed that, and we put the sax at the front of the song and made it a motif. Actually, we wrote out the sax parts instead of just improv. No, we wanted really a theme. And the Harden My Heart theme was, we wrote it together face to face. She had her sax, I had her guitar. Let's find something really cool for the top of that song. And it worked. And we released a local 45 made in our basement. And at that time we had a manager, he was just as new as we were, but he was enthusiastic. And he started taking it around to radio stations. And to my surprise, because I thought there's no way that the radio stations in Portland, Oregon are going to play a local band other than, we'll put it on at midnight and see for fun, to please them or something. But no, people started calling in and going, what was that song? Well, play it again, And and then it happened in Seattle, and then it happened in Eugene. And then in those 3 cities, Harden My Heart miraculously went to #1 on the charts. And it was sort of and we couldn't print the records out fast enough. I was we're working with this little duplicating company in Portland. And I was like, I need another 1,000. I need another 1,000. They're like, we can't get it out that quick. And Fred Meyer was screaming at us, we need more records. And it was a sort of a phenomenal moment in time. But and then David Geffen got word that something was going on in Portland, Oregon with this band. And he sent up an A&R person. And we got signed to Geffen. And that was, a sort of a 1 in a million shot. It was something that doesn't happen very often. And then the question was, could we repeat the success on a national level? And so we win it. David Geffen thought John Boylan would be a good producer for us, and he had been working with Ron. He'd done a lot of women singers, and he was extremely smart, sensitive human being, and he knew the record business. He was a vice president at CBS, but he could do independent production. So Geffen brought him in to do our record as an independent production because we were not on CBS. And John was a great producer for us, and we lived in his house in Los Angeles and recorded the first Quarterflash album. And pretty much overnight, it was released in October, and by April, that album was gold. And then by, I think, August, it was platinum, and then it went platinum in Canada. And so it happened really fast. And we were playing in a bar in Portland in October, and in that summer, we were doing the entire North American tour with Elton John, or the whole summer with Elton. And then we did a tour with Ron's dad and a tour with Sammy Hagar and all these different acts. And in fact, in '82, we were 9 months on the road, which was pretty intense. But so that's sort of an encapsulation of the Quarterflash story. Now, Quarterflash had 2 big albums. The first album was, I think, the first platinum album by an Oregon band. I may be wrong on that, but I've never heard of anybody else having one earlier. So we were riding pretty high, and the second album we were touring the first album endlessly, and then we had to write the second album real quick. And the label was like, "We got another one. We need another one." It's like, so we wrote the second album. Jack Charles and I, who was the other writer in the band, we wrote the second album. Oh gosh, I think in 3 months, and it wasn't as strong material. But it did have one song, Take Me to Heart, which was very radio friendly, and that song did really well. It was in top 20. And then another couple of songs. Overall, we had 5 top 40 songs, with Hard in My Heart by and away being, Hard in My Heart went number 1 on the rock chart and number 3 on the pop chart. And that clearly was the song that took the album into platinum status. And then after that, the third album, we had just one fiasco after another. And our person who was our champion at Geffen, at A&R, Carol Childs, left Geffen Records. And we didn't have a champion anymore within the label pushing us and promoting us and supporting us and all that kind of stuff that happens in record labels. But we went ahead and made a third album, but it didn't do very well. And then we decided, since Carol wasn't there, we felt alienated at Geffen. And he had, when we were on that label, when we got signed to Geffen Records in 1980, there was only 6 artists on that label. Hard to imagine. John Lennon, Elton John, Donna Summer, Peter Gabriel, and Asia, and us. That was it. So we got a tremendous amount of attention. But by the time of our second album and our third album happened, Geffen got all this money, and they went out and signed 1 million acts, and all of a sudden we were one of 50 acts instead of one of 6 acts, and it just changed. The whole feeling changed, and we parted amicably with Eddie Rosenblatt, the president, and David Geffen, and said, it was a great run. It was almost 6 years by then, and we parted ways, and then we signed with Epic, and worked really hard on a 4th album that was called Girl in the Wind. Unfortunately, that was a really bad situation. We worked 3 years on that record, and I think it's our strongest album. But it was the week it was going to be released, the Japanese company Sony Records bought CBS. And there was a huge turnover in the vice president. Tommy Mottola took over the label, And our person, who was the vice president, Don Grierson, who was fired, and all of his acts were shelved. So our album was done, it was mixed and mastered. It was actually a label, and it was copies were sold in Holland and Japan and a few other countries in Europe. But they immediately pulled all the copies out of the market and shelved it. And I tried to buy the masters from them, and they wouldn't sell them to me because they said, "What happens if we sell them to you and you take them to another label? It's a hit. Well, that's going to make us look bad." So it was incredibly depressing, to say the least, and I sort of sunk into a dark hole for a year and decided I was going to be a Japanese gardener. The success of the first album certainly was on everybody's mind. I mean, it was, you couldn't ignore it. It changed all of our lives completely. I mean, we went from starving artists to people who had money, and that alone changes how everybody sees you. So, we came off of the road of that 9 months off of that road, and we hadn't seen our friends who were still playing the bars, still playing, trying to scrape by like all musicians did, like we did for years. And all of a sudden, they know that if you sold 1 million records, that you certainly got some serious cash out of that, So their reactions to you would try to figure, you were trying to, I mean, I remember the feelings I had coming back to Portland and seeing old friends and stuff, that, it was difficult. It was because everybody, it's human nature, and I certainly have felt this, and everybody feels it, is that when somebody that has success or some luck, whatever you want to call it, and that you're just as talented as them. And I had lots of friends that were just as talented as me, or more so. But it just happened to be a luck of the draw. I mean, we were in the right place at the right time. We found a sound that was very different. I think Rindy playing the sax and being out front and being so photogenic certainly made a difference, and a lot of bands didn't have that. A lot of bands were just dudes with long beards and long hair and playing country rock, and they were great, but it wasn't that, and we just had that. We had a song that we rode the coattails of that was an undeniable pop hit, not intentionally. I didn't write it. It was just a song, and then when we finished recording it, we put the sax on it. We just went, well, that sounds like a hit song. It wasn't like I was going, no, I got to write a hit song. But it was just the way it turned out. Now, when we did the second album, now that changes. That's what a hit song is, Hard in My Heart. Now, do we need another hit song? That kind of thing. So yes, to answer your question, it changes your frame of mind as to what am I supposed to write here? Or what should I write? Or what's the right thing to do? Or is it wrong to try to write another Hard in My Heart or whatever? And I had changed all your life you're evolving as an artist, and so I was now being influenced by less by, let's say, Fleetwood Mac, and more by Elvis Costello. I was moving in that direction of Talking Heads and that kind of stuff, and what was termed falsely, I suppose, whatever described as new wave, I guess. But anyway, so I started writing more in that vein, but at the same time, the label was saying, well, this one of the songs that we did that was called "Take Another Picture," which was the name of the title of the album, which I really thought was an interesting piece of work, very different from "Hard in My Heart," and yet it still had the sax on it, but it was more, it was almost Graham Parker-ish or something like that. And, and they were going, well, we don't think that the radio's going to like this stuff or whatever. So I kind of put them off for a long time. And then I went, you know what, I'll give it a shot. So I wrote this song, "Take Me to Heart." And it was clearly, if you listen to "Take Me to Heart" and you listen to "Hard in My Heart," you go, oh, that's obviously the same band, the same writer. And there are some similarities to it. And so in a way, I was just doing that as like, well, yeah, if you want one of those, I can do that. And I didn't, and I had a really good relationship with my label at the time. They loved us, and they gave us so many good things, and it felt like, well, if that's what you want me to do, write something more like that first album, then I will. And I did. And sure enough, they picked that one to be the single. I mean, you never pick your own singles. They pick up the singles and they promote them to the radio stations. And that song did really well. Not as well as Heart in My Heart. So, it was perhaps a disappointment to them, but I didn't expect, it wasn't as hooky and catchy quite as the other one, but it was a good song. And so to answer your question, yeah, it does change it. And when the second album didn't do as well, it's amazing because that album sold 450,000 copies. Now, you ask somebody today if their album sells 450,000 copies, that's an amazing amount of records. But if you've already had a platinum album that's done over 1 million, then that sounds like a failure. So there was a lot of bullshit in the press and stuff about, the sophomore jinx and all this stuff. We had to, I just ignore that stuff. I was on doing my thing, and if people want to say what they want to say, it's fine. As I look back at, now that I'm in my 70s, for God's sake, I'm looking back at, writing songs since I was 16. If I was going to say what was the turning point that made me the way I am, is my relationship with my mom, which was very close, and she encouraged me. But when I was about 15, my mom started to exhibit symptoms of mental illness and became very depressed and anxious and became essentially agoraphobic, which you wouldn't leave the house. Me as a kid who was just beginning to express himself on a guitar, I think in a sense, what compelled me to write was that all of my childhood, I would bring my art to her, whether it was stories or paintings or whatever, and it would make my mom happy. So I think once I saw this slow slide that she made, which ended up into her suicide, I started to write. I just went into my room and I never came out. I basically went in there and I tried to write songs that were sorting out what was going on. So a lot of my really early songs are, they're clumsy, but they're sort of clumsy psychotherapy. They're dealing with a loss that I could see coming. And out of that loss is a sense of anxiety and a sense of dread. Eventually, when I left the house, because when I was in the house, there was this anxiety that was floating everywhere in the house. And my father was in total denial that anything was wrong. But us kids, we knew something was wrong. And I've explored that in a lot of my later songs, that feeling. There's a tune in there that I did called Opening Doors. That's one of my best tunes about what it was like to be in that house during that period of my life. But, so one of the things that's really difficult when you have a parent like that you are so close to, and then they become somebody else. And it changes everything. And I think in a sense, I was writing my way out of my fear. I think a lot of it. And if you even that you can listen to my right now, I'm so much older. When I wrote those, even the tunes for Quarterflash, I was in my 20s. I'm now 70. So 50 years ago, I look back at that writing, and you can see if you read the lyrics, and the lyrics were. That's another thing that's, if we're talking about my style of writing, to me, it's all about the lyrics. It's always the most important thing. And a way to try to communicate complex emotions is what I try to do. And so you can, if you go back and read my lyrics, even on the second Quarterflash album, which after all the initial success of the first album, instead of being confident and going into the second album and, like, yoo-hoo, we did it kind of a thing, or we are the champions, or anything like that. If you look at the lyrics of the second Quarterflash album that I wrote, what you see is this person who's very anxious and very fearful of, life. That a lot of my songs come from this sort of, I don't know, a sense of fatalism, I guess is the best way to put it. And I was influenced, to talk about literature that, obviously as an English teacher, I read tons of books, and I'm a total book nut. And I love mythology. Mythology was a really big thing for me as a kid. And I had tons of books on the Roman gods, and I got I saved in a Baptist church when I was like 8 years old, and then so for a while I was really into the Bible, and I memorized the books of the Bible and all this kind of stuff, and so I was we get into these really weird, deep places with every sort of obsessive, but it's all really, as I look back on, so much of it's tied to dealing with, the fact that I could see that my mom was slipping away. And so that still informs me, but I can see it at 70, I look at it much, with a different perspective. But a lot of the songs I've written, the best, I would say, probably, 5 of my 10 best songs, 5 would be in some way or another dealing with the loss of my mom. So that is what it keeps coming back, and being aware of that as I got older. I wasn't really able to write about it openly until I was damn near 60, in terms of really digging into how she died and thinking about it and what it was all about. And because every time I would go there in my head, I would just sort of freak out. So I would just stay away from that and write around it. Even in Hard My Heart, even though it's a simple love song, the second verse starts with the words, "All of my life I've been waiting in the rain." And that's that's sort of me, of what I am. And so there's a lot of, when I teach songwriting now, one of the things I try to teach my students is that even if you have no success in the music business, even if your songs are not heard by anybody but your friends and your family, there's an aspect of self-counseling into songwriting that I think is really important, that you dig deep into who you are and you try to express something. And that's what art is, let's face it, that's what art is. And so it's, the second half of my career, we came back out of the Quarterflash era. I was almost 40 at that point. And I started over. I started my own label. I opened my own studio. I started a new band, this group of great folk musicians called the Trail Band. We were actually assembled by the state of Oregon, asked me to put a band together that could recreate the music of the Oregon Trail era. Now, it seems like a crazy idea for a rock musician to do, but it was at the time in my life being done with Quarterflash in LA and the whole Geffen thing and all that stuff. It was like I couldn't think of anything better I wanted to do than to dig into the Oregon Trail diaries and try to write some kind of a piece that would be fun to do. And that led to, me telling the people at the state of Oregon that wanted to hire me to do that. I said, I'll do it, but I want to write a musical, because all my life I wanted to write a musical. So I wrote my first musical, which was based on 6 diaries from the Oregon Trail. And it won an ASCAP award, and the Trail Band came out of that play. It had 6 actors in it. And that was a phenomenal experience. And that band lasted for 30 years and played 100 shows at the Aladdin, mostly Christmas shows. We evolved from being a historical band to being a historical Christmas band to just being a Christmas band that did wacky stuff at the Aladdin Theater every year. And then out of that, there was a Native American actor in the Oregon Trail story, Keith Agawa, who was a Lummi. And Keith said, "Man, you should write a musical featuring Native American music and Native American history, not about pioneers, And it was like a challenge. And I went, "You're absolutely right. I should try to do that. Would you help me?" And he said, "Well, my sister would be a perfect person to start with because she's an amazing singer." And so I was able to hire his sister, Shinoa Agawa, and she became sort of one of my mentors on how we're going to approach it. It took me 10 years to co-write this musical with 6 Native Americans, dancers, singers, and artists. And the piece was called The Ghosts of Celilo. It was based on the inundation of the Celilo Falls fishing site, which was up on the Columbia River. And when the dam was built in '57, it destroyed the falls. It went underwater. And that was probably the best work I'd ever done, was that play. And it was a Artist Repertory Theater produced it, and it was a big hit. And we did a run in 2007, sold it out, and then we did another run in 2011, also did very well, and it won several awards. And it opened my brain. I had to go back to school and learn how to write for a musical. It was a much different animal. And then I had to also basically go to school by hanging out with Native American singers and learning their songs and stuff like that, and figuring out how we're going to integrate Native American music into Western style, Broadway style music. Phenomenal experience, and it was almost killed me, but we got through it, and it was wonderful. And so that was in a way, I kind of feel like it was a return to my mom, because of her being from the Flathead Reservation. She wasn't native, but she grew up on the res, and she had lots of friends who were native. And we would go back to Montana to see her hometown, which was a little town on the Flathead res called Ronan. And I just have these memories of being with her. And so those were, when I did Ghost of Celilo, it was kind of like, this is for you, Mom. This is what I think you would have loved. No, for me, my mom's influence on me and the impact on me psychologically of her passing and everything isn't something that I consciously draw on. You know what I mean? I don't go, well, no, I'll think about it. It just is me, So when I start to write any song, she's there in some form. And so it's not something I have to draw on. It's just in me. So it comes out. Certainly the books that I loved and the classes that I took in college to become, to teach literature definitely influenced me. And the poetry, of course, that I had to study and loved to study. It was, those things influenced me a lot. I was really into mythology as a kid. All the different stories of all the different religions and gods, and just the concept of what is a god and what is a religion. All those kind of things enter into my writing all the time, and I'll use metaphors that are religious based. The album that I did in 2019 with John Kuntz and Doug Frazier, the Kuntz-Ross-Frazier album, and that album won Album of the Year from the Oregon Hall of Fame, Music Hall of Fame. There's a song on there that went viral. We had 100,000 views. We made a video of which we shot it inside a church, and the song's called "I Won't Sing Here Anymore," and it's about a man who realizes that his Christian church has become radicalized by the Trump movement, and he walks away from the church. It's only a 3-minute song, but I had people from around the world saying how powerful that song was for them. And it's a very simple song. It's like 4 chords, and John crushed it. He sang it, I wrote it, and we just sat down together and looked right in each other's eyes and performed it in the studio. And then we just added a few things here. It's a very bare bones tune, but it's a perfect example of where my study of mythology and thinking about religion and how it affects us and how it hurts us and how all these different things, all of that stuff is important. And I think I call it pulling the camera back. When I talk to other young songwriters, I say, like you should be really like, if you read James Joyce, like The Dubliners, his collection of short stories, it's where the word epiphany kind of comes from. He writes these incredible small details about a gold coin will be in a hand, and he'll spend 3 pages describing a young man giving a gold coin to an old woman. And it's just that kind of up close. It's like the camera's really focused on the hand and the color of the coin and how the hand moves and all those kind of things like that. And then you pull back, and then you see, what we see here is a family in Ireland in the 1800s. You pull it back further, and you see far enough and you see the Catholic religion. You start to see what the whole point of the coin is and what it was all about. You pull it back even further and you go, what's the point of the Catholic religion? What's the point of Christianity? What's the point of God? And that, your verses can be very, very detailed and your chorus can pull back and be more universal. A lot of my songs do that. I'll do a lot of detail in the verses and then I'll try to find an overarching kind of theme that encapsulates that. So when in the song I Won't Sing Here Anymore is a good example, is that you start with, the guy starts the memories. These pews I sat with my mom and my dad and we sang these songs and it was wonderful to be in this church. But then things started changing, and pretty soon we're pull the camera back and now he's going, this is not the church I knew anymore. This is not the religion. This is not the God I know. And I'm walking out of this church, and I'm not coming back. So there's this sort of pulling back thing that I do in my writing that's definitely influenced by, in that case, by Joyce. But there's other writers that certainly have influenced how I approach a song, and certainly the metaphors that I use and the way I think about lyrics. How can I express something that hasn't been expressed before? How can I make people think? A lot of what I do in my songs, like if you listen to the Koontz Ross Frazier album, which I think is probably my best writing since the first Quarterflash album, every song on there is, my goal is to make people think. The first song, New American Blues, is about the homeless. And so it's like, I don't draw any big answers. So I don't say, here's the answer to this, how do we solve this problem? No, it's all about, this is the way the situation is. And nobody has a good answer for it. And why are we in this position? And the main line of the song is what happened here. And that's what I do. I kind of philosophize and I pull back, and then people listen to the songs and they go, oh, wow, that really that made me think. And that's the best. And that's how I was as a teacher. I tried to make my kids think. It wasn't like, here's an opinion or here's a good play and this is a bad play. It was like, here's a play. Here's what it's trying to say. Does this work for you? What does that make you think about? And so, yes, certainly my education and my experience as a teacher has, influenced my songwriting and who I am and how I want people to think of me as an artist. Yeah, Voices from the Oregon Trail was produced in '93. And that ran for the play itself. We toured it. The state of Oregon gave us a bus. And we went around to every small town in Oregon, just about, and brought in lights, brought in sound, brought in props, brought in actors and wireless systems. And, we put on a top-notch play that the trickiest part about writing that play was that it had to appeal from everybody from a fourth grader to somebody 80 years old, which, when you're writing songs, writing songs for fourth grade is different than writing songs for somebody who's 70 years old. So there was a lot of challenges. So there was children's songs in that piece, and there were songs that were very serious and kind of heavy duty. And then there were Native American songs that were, didn't have any English in them at all. So what I was trying to do was create this bam, 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 this sort of montage of these diaries, little bits of these diaries, and Native American words from the era too, of like what the hell was going on. Some really amazing stuff, but some really bad stuff, and then stuff that changed the world. I mean, 500,000 people came across on the Oregon Trail. It changed the country, and there's a lot of moral questions that were not even asked in that era as far as what was the right thing to do as far as settling this land. But yeah, again, making people think, that was my job. And I had people who were, and I just say Eastern Oregon are people who were very, nationalistic. And they did not like the play very much because it wasn't jingoistic enough. It was pretty much, I tried to lay out exactly what happened. And a lot of those people, those people who went across there, it took 6 months to get across the Oregon Trail. It's incredible that they survived. A lot of people didn't. Cholera was huge, and there was other diseases and stuff. And so, so you got to give it to them. If nothing else, they were tenacious. The pioneers that came across, the immigrants. You don't want to call them pioneers anymore, but they, so there's something to be admired about that kind of tenacity that those immigrants showed to get here, and they definitely defined Oregon and defined California and Utah with the Mormons and all that stuff. But then you look at the Native American side of it, you put those shoes on and you go, damn, what a disaster, what a horrendous thing that happened. And the Ghost of Celilo carried that on in the 50s, because Celilo, even in the 50s, Indian kids were, forced to go to boarding schools. And this Celilo Falls was 10,000, Indians had been there for 10,000 years. And they just buried it with a dam, destroyed it. And it's a scar that's, to the native people, they call themselves the river people, the Indians who still live on the river, that scar is never healed. And my play was a way of expressing, a way to try to solve, not solve anything, but to just expose the scar, to rip it open, that had been buried by, we're going to ignore that happened there, and say, no, look what happened there, and people were weeping at the end of the piece, and it was a powerful, powerful piece. And all the Native American actors and singers and dancers in that show, they were so proud to tell that's the real story of what happened there. And so that's why that piece for me, of all the things I've done, it was, Quarterflash or the Trail Band or Coons Ross Razor. I mean, the Ghost of Celilo was the hardest thing I ever did, because I didn't know any Native American actors and singers and dancers. I started from scratch, driving up to the reservations and just walking in and introducing myself to people, and that's really hard to do. And but I knew it was the right thing to do, and I'm glad I did it. But and then I have a guy who says he thinks it could be a Broadway piece, and so I'm trying to think, do I want to do that? Is that story appropriate to take to Broadway? Because that's another whole world that's, it's got its own ethos that isn't necessarily conducive to truth. So you can be, but it's very delicate. And when something becomes that commercialized, where you're putting it on Broadway, it's like we were discussing earlier with, like, well, am I making concessions as an artist? Well, when you get into doing a Broadway play, you have so many people with their fingers in the pot who investing millions of dollars into something like that. You go, is this going to corrupt the idea that we have, that was the nut of this, which was the truth of what happened? Or is that going to be something that somebody's going to want to lay down $100 for a ticket to see something like that? We don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll take it and see what happens. But I don't know. I'm undecided on that one. My process, as far as creating goes, is that things seem to fall into my lap at really crucial times, and so I never had to really, after Quarterflash, I never had to go out and seek some kind of inspiration or seek some kind of thing. I would get a phone call from somebody. The Oregon Trail play is a perfect example. I got a call from these people from the state of Oregon saying, we know that you're a writer. We know that you taught, that you were, had history in your background as an education. We know you know how to tour a show. We know how you're a producer. There's not many people who have those skill sets. Would you be interested in creating a traveling show that could, be for fourth graders to people who are 80 years old? Would you be interested in doing that? So those kind of things somewhat happen to me on a fairly regular basis. And then there's also, if I write a body of work, because I'm always writing. Every day I pick up the guitar and I'm working on a new song. I never stopped since I was 16. So if I all of a sudden hit a vein, which happens, and I'll write a ton load of songs in a very short amount of time. And if I feel like recording them, I'm lucky enough that I have, the financial wherewithal that I'm lucky I can go into the studio and pick great musicians and record it. And Rindy can sing the songs, or John Coons can sing the songs, or the guys from the trail bands can sing songs, and occasionally I'll sing a song, but not very often because I'm so horrible at singing. But it's, I was one of those kids that was never bored. I always had something going on. I was always either reading a book or painting or, playing guitar or playing basketball or something. And my mom insisted on that. And my mom, that's one of the great stories of my mom was that, and all my two siblings, we still laugh about it because, and I think it's made me who I am a lot, is that she was, like I mentioned, my mom was agoraphobic pretty much. She would not go out of the house unless she absolutely had to. So she just closed the blinds and, smoked cigarettes and played piano and, read. She loved to read. And but she wasn't going to have her kids be that way. So, and one of her sayings was, do as I say, not as I do. And so she forced my sister and I, my other brother, into the harsh world of reality constantly. So she would sign us up for, I remember, like I took wrestling camp. I took basketball camp. I went to vacation Bible school. I went to summer school. I went berry picking starting at 8 years old. I was out in the fields picking strawberries and raspberries and blackcaps and beans. I was helping neighbors. She would send me, go over to Mrs. Stell's place and help her with the yard. And these were often very uncomfortable encounters because a lot of times, like I remember going to Buckman School to learn how to take swimming lessons. Well, I went to Whitaker School. I didn't know any of the kids at Buckman Pool, but they had a class after school that all the Buckman kids took, and me. And so I was constantly forced to deal with people that I didn't know very well. And I guess it could have turned out bad where I'd turned into some kind of a recluse. But I felt like in order to survive, I had to deal with all these different people from, crazy coaches that I had growing up and, vacation Bible school teacher who was a nut and stuff like that I go, I managed to survive and deal with these people, and that served me extremely well throughout my life because mainly what I'm really good at, besides writing songs, is I'm really good at getting people together and creating something that's complex and making them feel really good about it and zeroing in on that person's strength, what their soul is and what their heart is, and putting that person in a position, whether it's in a play or in a recording studio or in a Christmas show or on singing the national anthem at the Blazer game. I'm really good at zeroing in on what that person's strength is and making sure that they get to put that strength in front of an audience and they're going to succeed. They're going to do really well and they're going to feel great about it. And that's a lot of that comes from being, I think, dealing with people, a lot of people that you don't know all that well, and having to make decisions that so that you fit in and that you're, the thing that I talk about my mom a lot, but the thing about my dad was a natural born leader. He had that thing that he walked into any situation where there was more than 3 people, and in 15 minutes they'd all be looking up at him. He was, my mom called him the benign dictator. And you love following him, even though it was like there was no question who you're going to follow. But he made it so much fun and made it such a rewarding experience. And that where the word benign comes from there is that he was very good at making you feel good about yourself, doing what he wanted. And I got a lot of that from him. A lot of the way I produced the Christmas shows for years, for instance, was I would bring in people like Paul DeLay, and I'd bring in people like Linda Hornbuckle. I'd bring in all these people that I didn't, a lot of these guests, I'd called up Heck Harper, who was the singing cowboy of Portland, Oregon, and just before he passed away. And I said, Heck, you don't know me, man, but, I was on your TV show and I was 8 years old. Why don't you come down, and sing a song? I knew he was, critically ill. And he put on his cowboy suit and he came back on and sang, and it was just so powerful. And that's the kind of thing, I knew what he would love, and I knew what the audience would love out of that. And I worked really hard in terms of every aspect, the lighting, the costuming, what songs we picked, everything. I knew him well enough that I could put him in a spotlight, even though he was ill, and even though it was challenging for him, I knew that he was going to crush that show. And people were weeping when he played and standing ovation. So and my relationship with Rindy's been that way, that I know her so well, and I suppress my ego completely and write not from a male point of view, but I can write from a female point of view, and make sure that she's, comfortable on stage, and that, we don't do something that makes her. I'm not going to write a song that makes her feel uncomfortable or takes her out of who she is, and so that's part of what I do. I'm not the guy up front in performance. I'm never going to be that. I was never that guy. I was the guy who wrote the songs and made the production work, and loved to just sit back and watch somebody else shine. That's what I always did. After I finished Ghost of Celilo, I really needed to decompress, and everything had been. The Ghost of Celilo was such a challenge because there were 50 people at the least. I was also writing all the grants. So not only was I dealing with a whole troupe of actors, musicians, dancers, director, producers, I was also going out to foundations and meeting people and asking for money to put on this show. And then I had to write these extremely complicated grants to get money and keep financial records of all that. And I also had to get the Native community to trust me, which involved doing a lot of talks and meetings and lunches and buying people things and explaining what I was trying to do, that I wasn't just, some white dude trying to rip off their culture. So I spent lots of time building trust with the Native community. So when that whole thing ended, I was peopled out. I mean, I was like, just the idea. So right after that, so 2009, around in there, I started writing. I decided to go back and write about my childhood, about my family for the first time. And I wrote this album called Goodbye, Uncle Buzz. And it's about the first song, the title song is about a story of a young boy who finds his uncle dead in his basement. Clearly, I'm writing about my mom, but I'm using my uncle just to sort of protect myself and my family, who still, listens to my songs. And I didn't want to, it didn't hurt the strength of the song at all to switch it from my mom to my uncle. And then I wrote about my brother on that, which I have a very complicated relationship with my brother. And I wrote about my father on that album, and I wrote about Rindy's father on that record. So it was all about taking it all the way back down to being a child again, and seeing the world through a child's eye of what that's like. And that's a really strong album. It's a dark, complex album. I used a lot of more extended chords, and because they seem to fit my emotions, which they're not black and white, my emotions on that whole era of my childhood. So and then after I finished that, we had a very interesting, again, one of those bizarre calls you get out of the blue. I got a call from Oregon Economic Development, and they said, "We love what you've done in terms of being getting people to work together and to be able to pull things together and make it work in situations that are unusual. And we have contacted with Mercy Corps. And at the time, Mercy Corps was one of the very few nonprofit organizations in the world that was allowed into North Korea. So they said, we would like to, we asked the North Korean representatives at the UN what they would like from Oregon. And North Korea said, we want penicillin. I mean, this is a country so poor, they're asking for, can we get some penicillin, for Christ's sake? I mean, it's unbelievable. And they wanted these basic medicines, and they wanted apple trees from Oregon, which is a little known fact is that there are millions of apple trees that were from Oregon that are now in North Korea, growing all over the mountains of North Korea, where people were starving just a few decades ago to death, millions of people starving to death. And they said, would you go to North Korea and put a band together for that? And I said, wow, that sounds intense. Yeah, I'll do it. So Randy and I put together an ensemble that could play. They said, the North Korean rep said, we don't have anything that represents what country music is. And could you put something together that was like folk traditional American folk country. And so I put this band together, and we went to North Korea for almost 3 weeks. And that was, I have to say, in terms of a life experience, it was a one in a gazillion, because there's only been a handful of musicians that have ever played in North Korea in front of an audience. And we played 5 shows in front of North Koreans on live television. And so by the time we left, what was fascinating is, they force you as a visitor to North Korea, they force you to tour the communist great leaders, his house where he was born, and where his statues and all these memorials to communism. And so you go out on a bus, and they give you this tour with somebody who speaks English, and they tell you all about it's basically propaganda. You go through the museums and see all the North Koreas, the great leader, and Kim Il Sung and all that. You see all of his family and stuff, and then they try to get you to say something great about North Korea on camera so that they can use it as propaganda. And I had to deal with that. My job as the guy who was sort of like in charge of that thing, I was the one who had to say, it's clear that the North Koreans love their great leader, but I was able to. I had to very carefully choose my words so that I didn't say, I love the great leader. Of course, after Trump, it doesn't matter. Obviously, he loves the great leader, so whatever. But at the time, this was before all that. So that was a pretty important time in my life. That experience was profound and scary and horrifying, and I got ill. I was so upset, I think, by what I was seeing in North Korea for 3 weeks that we had people, like before we would go on stage, a guy would walk up to you with a North Korean, party member, elite, and he would say, his exact words were, we're nervous enough. For God's sake, we're Americans playing on a North Korean stage, and that there are billboards all over town showing U.S. soldiers, bayoneting babies. So it's like you already hated it before you walk one step onto the stage. But this guy walks up to us, we're just about to go on stage, and Randy's, I'm hanging in there, I'm same way, man. This is like so freaky that we're going out there to do this show. And, this guy walks up and says, performance must be successful. And it was so absurdly inappropriate and cruel thing to say to somebody before they walked out on stage that it was funny. I burst out laughing because I was like, can it get any more worse than this? He's demanding that we have a successful performance, and oh my God, we're Americans in North Korea. And again, I think here's a good example of where I think, I really put a lot of thought into when we were going to go to North Korea, and I thought, how is this going to fly when we're on stage? And I thought, you know what we have to do? We have to learn a Korean song. We have to. If we do that, that may be the bridge. If we show them that we respect their culture enough, that we have taken the time to learn a Korean song, maybe that will save our bacon when we're on stage. And it was the best idea I ever had in my life. And we found one. In fact, it's sort of the national folk, theme of North Korea. It's about a man and a woman on opposite sides of the river. Arirong is the name of the song, and we learned it. And it wasn't easy, but we did it, and it was amazing because they started singing along, and it was like powerful moment. So that was one. That was a great experience. And after that, I knew Quarterflash was coming to an end. I wanted to do one more really great record with Quarterflash that was a rock album, and so I had about 4 or 5 songs I thought were strong, and then I had this one that was kind of Middle Eastern sounding, very exotic sounding I wanted to do, and I couldn't finish it, and for the first time, Randy and I called Randy, I said, I know you don't like writing songs with me, it's always been you sing the song and I write it, you'd get real frustrated when we work together writing, but let's try to write this. So that album was called Love's the Road, and that was a song that we wrote because it was an expression of our life, that by then we were in our 60s, and we had been playing together since we were 16. And so that Love is the Road was the only song that we wrote together. And it's one of my favorite songs. It's a beautiful piece. And Reed just absolutely crushes it. And it's got a Middle Eastern scale as the basis for the modal of the sound of the song, which I was experimenting with, was that mode. But that album's a really strong album. That's a really good record, Love is the Road. And then we retired Quarterflash not long after that because felt like it was time. And we did it just before COVID hit, so it was good timing. And then we also did the same thing with the Trail Band and the Christmas shows. We'd run the Christmas shows for 25 years. We raised $1 million for Friends of the Children through the course of those 25 years, over $1 million. So we had done so much good work with the Trail Band, and it had come out of a really different place and evolved into this amazing Christmas show. We had all these wacky, from Darcel to Paul DeLay we had on stage, and it was time to end that too. I'd done it for 25 years, and I was tired of doing it. And so we retired Quarterflash and the Trail Band within a year of each other. And so now we're just playing as a duet. We got a show coming up in October at the Alberta Rose Theatre. We love it's a return to it's what we did in college. It's just the two of us. With again, I'm playing guitar. She's got a couple saxophones there. And we play songs from all of our long career together, and we love it. And it's easy and it's fun. There's very little stress. We know each other so well. We know the songs inside and out, and it's sort of like just a circle for us. As far as advice to a budding songwriter or a young songwriter who wants to, grow and think of this as maybe something I want to do for the rest of my life. The hardest thing for me to teach, because I teach a lot of different ways when I'm doing, because the lyric writing and the music part of it, ideally should be taught at the same time. I think a lot of people think, do you write the lyrics first? Do you write the music first? And kids want to know that when they come in. Would you write the lyrics first? And I try at a very early stage with kids that really songwriting is the art of bringing those two things together, that they complement. So I try to stress not thinking of them as separate, but as similar. So if you get a musical idea, let's say you're fooling around the piano, and let's say you get 4 or 5 chords and maybe just a hint of a melody or something like that on the piano, and you're thinking, ooh, this is going to be a song. Now, that early stage is really critical, where you're going to go with something. And there are certain people who are afraid of lyrics, they consider that, that's my weak part of my songwriting ability. I can write great melodies and find really cool loops and grooves and stuff, But that moment when you think, oh my gosh, this is something that what I ask my students to do right then is that stop and play that, and then go and ask yourself, how do I feel? And it's a really simple question, but if you don't ask it, you can, if you just keep playing noodling and going or refining it, and which is something that happens a lot with songwriters that are afraid to dig in and write the lyric, is that they end up, let's put a drum part on it now. Let's put, you've just got the 4 chords or something, and you're already going, well, maybe we could find a harmony part with that other part, And I'm going, stop. What it's all about is you need to define what those chords mean to you, what they're doing to you emotionally. If those chords are making you feel, let's say, determined, then let's think about that a minute. Let's think about what that means. What's going on in your life right now where you feel like you need determination? You ask that question. If it makes you feel sad, then the question is, well, let's stop and think about that. Those chords are making you sad. Where do those chords come from? Why are you playing those chords right now? Or that guitar lick, whatever it is. But obviously you're feeling something that brought that out. And if you become aware of that, even if you just become aware of the emotion, not necessarily the specifics of why you're sad, but just to say to yourself, oh, this is sad. Well, right then you've already done one of the hardest things to do, which is that if you write the lyric that conveys the sadness that you feel, even if it's not about what you're personally experiencing, you can, turn it make it an analogy to somebody else's experience, whatever you want to do, or change the characters like I did in Uncle Buzz. It's still, what's good is that you have cemented the emotion to the chords. And it's one of the hardest things to do, is that people tend to write something and then they write the lyric later, and they seem disconnected. They seem like, well, that lyric kind of fits with that mood, but it doesn't really fit with that mood. But if you explore the mood as you're writing, before you get too far, you might come up with a line. And that line may just pop out of your mouth. If you're thinking about, oh, here's why I feel determined, and you're just thinking about it, and then here's kind of the hooky part of it, and it just kind of, all of a sudden, something like, I'm going to harden my heart. There's something about the determination of that song, of making a decision right then, that kind of thing. That's one piece of advice I give a lot of my students, because they tend to be either one way or the other. They tend to write 80-page of lyrics with no music, or they write an entire symphony and go, now I need to get words to it. So it's like, no, put them together and build them together. And so that's my one sort of, I guess you'd say, technical suggestion I give to a lot of songwriters. And on a totally different plane of inspiration, the hardest thing for me to teach, and this goes with whether I'm teaching English or whether I'm teaching, history, or whether I'm teaching songwriting or whatever, is you've got to love what you create. It's just, you've got to allow yourself to fall in love with it. You cannot, if you are so self-critical and you're so, if you're examining yourself and comparing yourself, let's say, to the best songwriters in the world, and you've only written 20 songs, you're just going to you're just beating yourself up. So you gotta just go, oh, that is the greatest thing ever. You gotta allow yourself to bathe in the fact that you created something that's warm and wonderful and that came out of you and nobody else, and enjoy it and dig it and dance to it and go, yeah, I did that. And there's so many people who want to be songwriters or musicians or what, who have that's missing in them. And you can only, I don't know that you can, I can't teach that. All I can do is allow them a emotional license, a warrant to love yourself. Because if you don't, you're not going to write for very long. You're going to just get yourself in a spiral, and you're just going to go down down the drain after a while, because you're not necessarily going to get it from anybody else when you're starting out. You're not going to get people walking up to you and saying, that's the best thing since the Rolling Stones. It's not going to happen. So you'd better be your biggest supporter and lover of what you do. And that, if you do that, then you'll want to do another one, because that made you feel really good. And that's. I wish I could teach that. I wish I could teach somebody to love themselves. I can't do it. I had a mother and a father who taught me to love myself. And if you are missing those two elements, then it's a lot harder. And I know people who are in that boat. But if I could teach them one thing, it would be to love what you create and don't worry about what anybody else thinks. My career, often Rindy and I joke, and we talk about, because now, we're up there. And, we kind of laugh every once in a while when we have to pinch ourselves. We've done so many things in our career. Our lives have been extremely full. One project after another, one album after another, one play, whatever. It's just really a rich, crowded tapestry that we're on. And it's sort of, it's like we won the lottery in a lot of ways, Randy and I, because we were so young at 16, and we found, not only did we find life partners who fell in love with each other, but we found actually at the same time, the same career path. And we complemented each other, because I didn't sing and she didn't write. So we weren't ever in competition. We were one, we together Marv and Randy Ross, formed one good musician who could sing and write songs. I think a lot of our success, which has been, more than anybody could hope for, that is based upon this really, serendipity relationship that we have with each other, which is extremely deep love and also extremely deep respect. And we still, if someone would have told us when we were kids, playing, in the bars, at 20 years old or whatever, that we would, at 70 still be playing and having a fun time, I would have gone, you got to be crazy, but here we are, and we're still loving it and enjoying it and doing it. I remember specifically driving in a car with the violin player in Seafood Mama, and I must have been, 25, I guess, at the time. And he asked me, he said, "How do you feel about music?" And I remember I was kind of hesitant. I couldn't quite get my head around what he was asking, and I couldn't form any words. And he said, for me, music is like a warm blanket that I can pull over myself at night, and I'll sleep really well. And I remember thinking, boy, it's not that for me. It's a driving, thing of like, I don't know if I can do this. I feel anxious. I'm holding on really tight to, trying to just survive and make it in the music business, So it was I went, wow, it's amazing that he feels that, because he was younger than me at the time. And now as I get older, I look back on that and I go, that's who I was. I mean, I'm not that same person, but I was a driven guy that worked really, really hard for the success we got, and I feel. But now, being where I am now, music is indeed a warm blanket that I can pull over myself and sleep well at night.